we will continue our discussion about photosynthesis. This time, we are going to focus our discussion on discussing light-independent reaction, also known as the Calvin cycle. So last week, we discussed about the light-dependent reaction. We know what are the processes involved in those two reactions. Meron tayong cyclic pathway and also the non-cyclic pathway, wherein the products of the light-dependent reaction will be used ngayon sa light-independent reaction. So ano nga yung products na naproproduce doon sa light dependent? We have ATP and NADPH as well as oxygen as a waste product. But yung ATP and NADPH, yun yung gagamitin natin later on dito sa ating Calvin cycle. Okay? So going back to our discussion about photosynthesis, we all know that it has two reactions, the light-dependent reaction and the light-independent. So the light-dependent will happen only if there's light. Okay? Ngayon, sa light-independent reaction, ito siya, no need na yung light energy. Hindi na natin kailangan ng light energy for this reaction as long as yung ATP and NADPH that were produced in the light-dependent reaction is already available. So if available na yung dalawa, then we can proceed with the light-independent reaction. Okay? So what are the objectives that we have for this topic? First, we need to describe the different phases of the Calvin cycle. Second, we need to identify the different factors that affect the phases of the Calvin cycle. And lastly, to compute for the number of ATPs needed or gained in the Calvin cycle. So those three are our objectives for this topic. Okay, so let's proceed. So again, our photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast, which is a specialized organelle present only for autotrophs. Now, we discussed the light-dependent reaction, and we know that this happens in the thylakoid membrane. Okay? So, sa thylakoid membrane, nangyayari yung ating light-dependent reaction. Yung ating light-independent reaction ngayon, it will happen sa stroma of the chloroplast. Sa stroma, doon nangyayari yung process of the Calvin cycle. Okay? So please do not forget about that. Again, light-dependent happens in the thylakoid membrane, while the light-dependent happens in the stroma. So this is the overview of the whole photosynthetic process. You can see how the light-dependent reaction is separated dun sa light-independent. So you can see also that the light energy is used doon talaga sa thylakoid, while we produced ATP and NADPH as part of the products of the light-dependent reaction, and it goes doon sa Calvin cycle. Kasi kailangan siya ng Calvin cycle. Dito din papasok yung carbon dioxide that our plants also need for the process, ultimately producing sugar, which will be used as a food source for plants and other organisms. Also, at the end of the Calvin cycle, yung NADP+, tsaka yung ADP, babalik sila doon sa thylakoid membrane to proceed with the light-dependent reaction. Now, for the light-independent reaction, it is also called as carbon fixation cycle. Ito yung other names niya. Carbon fixation, C3 cycle, or dark reaction. So those are the other names of the process. But ultimately, we commonly know this light-independent reaction as the Calvin cycle. So, yun yung parang common talaga na name. Okay, so the light-independent reactions again, also known as the Calvin cycle, are named so because energy from the photons is not directly involved or required for the process. It only happens dun sa light reactions. Again, what the Calvin cycle needs are the products of the light reaction. And these are the products of the light reaction na kailangan for the Calvin cycle to proceed. Meaning, kahit hindi kailangan ng light ni Calvin cycle, without the products of the light reactions, then it will not still proceed. So, importante pa rin yung light energy. Okay? Again, without light energy, light reactions will not occur. Light reactions will not be able to produce ATP and NADPH, and ultimately, it will not start the Calvin cycle. So, parang may domino effect din sila if light is not available. So the light-independent reaction run on the ATP and NADPH molecules generated from the light-dependent reactions, or also known as the light reactions. Now, in this Calvin cycle, dito na papasok yung carbon dioxide na kinukuha ng mga leaves at pinapapasok doon sa stomata. Now, di ba, when we discuss about the equation of photosynthesis, the plant needs water and carbon dioxide as well as light energy, of course. While si water, we used it sa light-dependent reaction. Ngayon, si carbon dioxide naman yung gagamitin natin for the Calvin cycle. So the product of the light-independent reaction will produce glucose, one molecule of glucose, which is considered as a sugar, of course, and it will ultimately be used by our plants so that they will have their food source. All right, so those are some of the backgrounds that we have for the light-independent reactions. Now, for the Calvin cycle, meron tayong three main phases. Okay? So, when we have discussed about light dependent, 'di ba may dalawang pathways sila, the non-cyclic tsaka cyclic. Now, in this Calvin cycle naman, may three main phases tayo. Ano yung phases na yun? Ang phase 1 is what we call the carbon fixation. Then the second phase is what we call the reduction phase. And the third one is what we call the regeneration phase. So, kumaga, to simplify it, we have first fixation, second reduction, third regeneration. So, yun yung tatlong main phases na yun. So, let's look at the overview of the Calvin cycle and saan natin nire-refer yung main phases. Ayan. So, this is the overview of the Calvin cycle process. So, meron tayong three stages or phases. Again, stage 1 is called carbon fixation. Then stage 2 is called reduction. And stage 3 is regeneration of ribulose. So, to discuss lang some overview about the phases, ang stage 1 or carbon fixation, by the name itself, we were trying to fix carbon molecule doon sa already existing na molecule called RUBP. Okay? Ganito kasi yan. Sa isang Calvin cycle, may isang molecule na ma-regenerate or talagang babalik siya or readily available. Ganun. We call it the RUBP or ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate. Yan. So, yung molecule na yan yung mag-start sa ating Calvin cycle kung saan papasok yung carbon dioxide. Okay? Now, when we talk about carbon fixation, yung carbon from the carbon dioxide, i-fix natin or i-insert natin yung carbon na yun doon sa RUBP na molecule. Okay? So that's why it's called carbon fixation. And ultimately, it will produce this molecule called PGA or 3-phosphoglycerate. So yan yung stage 1. Now, ang stage 2, it's the reduction phase. It happens dun sa molecule natin na 3-phosphoglycerate. Mag-undergo lang siya ng series of reduction. Yan, until such time that maka-create ng molecule called glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate or G3P. So, yan. Yan yung end ng stage 2. Again, stage 2, reduction phase pa lang tayo. So, stage 3 is the regeneration of ribulose. Kumbaga, sa regeneration, kailangan natin makaproduce ulit ng RUBP na molecule para yun ulit ang mag-mimit doon sa carbon dioxide for the next Calvin cycle. Okay? So, that's stage 3, regeneration of ribulose. Ang end ng stage 3 is the formation of this molecule. So, that's the overview of the Calvin cycle. Of course, very complex siya, so we will discuss it as simply as possible. So, ready na ba? Sige. So, if ready na tayo, then let's proceed. Yan. So, I will try to discuss it and I will draw it para mas masabta na to ang process. So, in the carbon fixation or Calvin cycle process, we will start first with the molecule called 1-ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate. So, ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate. Or also known as RUBP. So, yan yung ano niya, name, tapos ito yung acronym niya. So, ano tong molecule na to? Bakit ganito yung pangalan niya? So, this molecule, meron siyang 5 carbon. Now, imagine each circle na i-draw ko, that's a carbon molecule. So, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Tapos, may naka-attach sa kanyang dalawang phosphate. Okay? So, phosphate na isa, naka-attach doon sa first carbon. Let's draw a number for each na lang. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yan, ribulose 1,5. Bakit may number na 1,5? Kasi yung phosphate is attached doon sa first carbon. Yung isa is naka-attach doon sa fifth carbon. And yung bisphosphate, kasi by dalawang phosphate yung naka-attach. Okay? Is that clear? So I hope that's clear. Now, when we discuss about carbon fixation or Calvin cycle, we need 3 molecules of RUBP to start. So, erase ko muna tong iba para mas clear. Yan. So, kailangan natin ng tatlong RUBP para makastart tayo sa ating Calvin cycle. Yan. Ay, sorry. 5 lang pala. We need 5. Yun. So, we have now 3 molecules of RUBP. Okay? So I hope okay pa tayo dyan. So we will now start with the first stage or first phase called carbon fixation. So ngayon, papasok yung carbon dioxide. So we need 3 molecules of carbon dioxide for this carbon fixation. Meron tayong enzyme that will facilitate this fixation process. We call this enzyme as Rubisco. So that's the enzyme na mag-facilitate doon sa carbon fixation process. Okay? So ngayon, tatanggalin natin or i-separate natin yung carbon tsaka yung oxygen. So we will now have 3 ka-carbon plus 3 ka-O2. Tama? So asa man mo adto ning si 3O2, it will go out as a waste. Since they don't need oxygen for this process, they only need the carbon. Okay? So with that, the carbon molecule will be fixed. I-insert natin yon doon sa ating tatlong molecules ng RUBP. So since meron tayong tatlong molecules ng RUBP, tsaka meron tayong tatlong molecules ng carbon, then tag-isa-isa sila. So bigyan natin lahat. So with that, we will produce 3 molecules of ribulose 1,6. Yan. Meron na tayong 3 molecules ng 6 carbon. Okay, so bakit naging 6 to? If you're going to count the number, 5 lang dito sa ribulose by bisphosphate. Dito, we now have 6 carbon. Saan galing yung carbon? Doon galing sa carbon dioxide na pinasok natin sa Calvin cycle. Alright? So I hope that's clear. So that's carbon fixation. Na-fix natin yung ating carbon doon sa RUBP. Now, ano yung next step na gagawin? So to end the carbon fixation process, we have 3 molecules of ribulose 1,6 bisphosphate. We are going to separate the 3 para maging 6 sila. 6 molecules of a 3 carbon molecule called 3-phosphoglycerate. Diba, ang ating kailangan is yung 3-PGA. Okay? 3-phosphoglycerate. So, ang gagawin lang natin, we will cut this into 2. Yan. So, ihati lang natin yung molecule natin. And you can see now that they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we now have 6 molecules of, yan. If ato siyang i-arrange, ako siyang i-rearrange ha. So ako na siyang i-reason para mas clear. Ato lang siyang gihati para makaproduce taog 6 kabuok. Ay, sorry. Ayan. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Yan. So, 6 na siya kabuok from the 3 molecules. And this molecule now is what we call the 3-phosphoglycerate. 3-phosphoglycerate. Or ang acronym niya is 3-PGA. So I'm going to erase this ink so we can have another one. I-reason sa ako ang ink ha. I will draw it naman. Alright, so tapos na tayo sa stage 1 or phase 1 called carbon fixation. Now, let's proceed to stage 2 or phase 2 called reduction phase. So, ang starting point natin for the reduction phase is yung product natin sa carbon fixation, which is yung 6 molecules of 3-PGA. 6 molecules of 3-PGA. So, remember, we have 6. Yan. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Yan. So we have now the 6 molecules of 3-PJ. So what will be the next part here? So the next part here, we are going to have to use the product that we have from the light-dependent reaction. Okay? So dito na ngayon papasok yung products natin of the light-dependent reaction. So ang first na gagamitin natin is the ATP. So papasok ngayon yung ATP. Ilang molecules of ATP ba ang need natin for this process? 6 molecules of 3-PJ ang meron. So, we need to have 6 ATP. So, 6 ka-ATP ang kailangan natin. So, yung ATP natin will undergo a reduction phase. And so, what will happen? The ATP will donate one of its phosphate. 'Di ba may tatlong phosphate sila kaya triphosphate. So yung isa ibibigay nila doon sa Cang3-PGA. So ang mangyayari, we will have 6 molecules ngayon of ganito na molecule. Okay? So we have these 6 molecules. Si ATP will become ADP kasi nawalan na siya ng isang phosphate kaya naging diphosphate na lang siya. Ano ngayon yung pangalan ng molecule na to? We call this 1,3 bisphosphoglycerate. So that's the name of this molecule na nandito ngayon. So we have 6 na molecules. Bakit siya 1,3 bisphosphoglycerate? Because yung phosphate is connected sa first carbon and third carbon of the molecule. Kaya siya 1,3. Then yung bis was added kasi dalawang phosphate na yung present. Saan galing yung phosphate? Galing siya kang ATP. Okay? Followed me so far? May order po ba yung 1,3, sir? Anong order yun? 1,3, yan yung order niya kasi mag-start talaga kayo sa number 1. So, 1,3. So, order niyan, ito, 1, sorry. 1, 2, 3. Ganyan. 1,3 bisphosphoglycerate. The next thing that will happen, mag-undergo ulit ng reduction process and papasok ngayon yung NADPH, which is another, yan, another na product of the light-dependent reaction. So we also need 6 molecules of NADPH. NADPH. Yeah. So what will happen to this? Yung isang phosphate that we added a while ago, kang 3-PGA, we will get that again. Parang tatanggalin natin siya and we will add hydrogen. Okay? So ang mangyayari, we will have a molecule na ganito, 6 lahat. One, two, three, four, five. And last one, we have 6. So we will remove the phosphate sa first carbon and add hydrogen nagaling kang NADPH. So ngayon, si NADPH will become NADP+. Then, meron tayong 6 din na phosphate ions. Saan galing yung phosphate ions? Yun yung galing sa first carbon. Then, saan galing si NADP+? Ang NADPH lang siya, tinanggalan natin ng hydrogen si NADPH at naging NADP+ na siya. Wait lang guys, may problem sa camera. Okay, so okay na siguro. Yan. Okay, so nasa na yung hydrogen? So si hydrogen ngayon, nandun na siya sa position ni first, yung phosphate na nasa first carbon. Yan. So parang naging replacement siya doon sa phosphate. Okay? So this molecule now, this is now a different molecule. Magkaiba na yung molecule na to dito sa 3-PGA kasi may additional hydrogen atom siya, di ba? So this molecule now, this is now what we call as glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. No, sa muna akong camera. Yan. Saan mo ito siya lagay? Dito na lang sa taas. Glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Ang kanyang acronym is G3P. Yan yung para acronym. So we have produced 6 molecules of glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate at the end of our reduction phase. Okay? So let's proceed to the third. So let me erase again. So we have now proceed to the third phase called the regeneration of RUBP. So ang starting molecule natin is yung 6 molecules ng G3P or glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, which is this one. 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hindi ko na i-add yung H ha, basta nakalagay na dyan yung H. Yan, sa G3P. Okay? So, sa 6 na G3P na yan, 1, one G3P will be used to produce yung ating glucose molecule. So, it will just stay here, yung isang G3P, and it will wait for another Calvin cycle para makaproduce ng isang glucose. Bakit kailangan niya pa mag-wait? Kasi glucose dapat 6 yung carbon. Okay? So we only have 3 carbon for this one, so they need to wait for another Calvin cycle so that they can produce a molecule of glucose. Alright? So yan yung mangyayari sa isang G3P. So we will now have 5 G3P to work on for the regeneration of RUBP. So 5 na lang yung magagamit natin. Kasi kinuha na natin yung isa. 4 and 5. Yan. So sa 5 na yan, gagamitin natin yan to produce 3 molecules of 5 carbon na RUBP or yung ribulose 1,5 bisphosphate. Okay? So ano yung gagawin natin? First, kailangan mo natin mag-count ng carbon. Okay? So, ilan ba yung carbon ang pwede nating magawa out of this? So, we have 5 times 3. So, 15. Tama? So, 15 divided by 3. So, we have 5. So, perfect. So, we will have 5 carbon molecules. So, count lang natin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yan. So, pwede to. Then, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Another. Yan. So, perfect siya. But before we can fix this other carbon dun sa ibang G3P, kailangan muna natin tanggalin yung phosphate so that we can add those carbon. So, ang gagawin natin, let me fix muna my camera. Yan. So, ang gagawin natin, we will remove itong phosphate dito sa ating fourth and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Tatanggalin natin yung phosphate natin dito sa fourth molecule and fifth molecule. So we will remove this phosphate. We will have 2 phosphate ions as a byproduct now. So mawawala na ito. We can now proceed in adding this free carbon doon sa ating other molecules. Okay? So with that, ilan yung kailangan sa first molecule? 2. So we will have this 2 and add it here sa first carbon. Making it this 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yan. Okay? So, 2 na yung nawala. So, we only now have 4. So, we will remove again 2. I-add natin dun sa second molecule. So, this will now become this. And of course, we have 2 left. So, it will be added dun sa third. Ayan. Now, ano pa kaya yung kulang natin so that we can successfully regenerate our RUBP molecule. So, kulang ito ng phosphate. Hindi pa siya pwedeng RUBP kasi kailangan may phosphate tayo sa first carbon. Diba? If you could remember the first stage. Yan. So, hindi pa siya ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate kasi kulang pa siya ng isang phosphate. So with that, kakailangan natin ng presence ng tatlo pang ATP. So dito papasok yung tatlong ATP and it will give 1 for each. So si ATP, it will become ADP. And we now successfully regenerated ang RUBP natin. So that's the end of the third phase. And this RUBP molecule will again meet with the carbon later on, with another carbon later on, para maka-successful siya na produce ng isang glucose molecule. Meaning, para makaproduce tayo ng one glucose of molecule, how many times tayo need mag-Calvin cycle? Right, twice lang. Maybe you're searching sa, ganito siya. Maybe you're searching sa Google, how many times do you have to have Calvin cycle para magano? Tama naman yung 6 if you only have one ribulose bisphosphate. Okay? Nagets ba? If you only have one ribulose bisphosphate, you need to have 6 turns of Calvin cycle for you to produce a 6-carbon molecule of glucose. But sa ating example, we have already 3 molecules of ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate. So since tatlo na yung RUBP natin, you only need to have 2 Calvin cycle para makaproduce ka ng isang glucose molecule. Okay? Yun, kasi baka pag-search nyo sa Google kanina, 6 na terms. Tama yun, pag isang RUBP at isang carbon dioxide ang gagamitin niyo. But if your sample has 3 RUBP plus 3 carbon dioxide, then that will turn 2 Calvin cycle lang para makaproduce ng 1 glucose molecule. Alright, so I hope that was clear. So that's actually the Calvin cycle as a whole. Now, if you're going to think of it, medyo madali lang naman siya intindihin if you know the flow of the cycle lang. Alright? Now, dito sa presentation natin, may nakalagay dito yung mga explanation for each, which we just explained kanina while we draw. Yan, phase 1, with the Rubisco yung enzyme. Yan. Yung gray na circle, that's the carbon, ha. Yan. Okay, our 3-PGA, that's the end of phase 1. Then si phase 2, reduction. Yan, basahin nyo na lang to. Parang doon sa in-explain natin, same lang naman siya. Yan, so sa reduction, pumasok si ATP, naging ADP na siya. 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate yung name. Then, si NADPH din papasok. It will change into G3P later on. Yan, so nawala si phosphate ions, kinuha siya. Yan. So ganito yung parang sa reduction phase, at the end of the reduction phase. Ito yung products. So we have G3P plus ADP plus phosphate plus NADP plus. Yung ADP, yung phosphate, tsaka yung NADP+, sila yung babalik sa light-dependent reaction. Tama? If you can remember yung input sa light-dependent reaction, dito yun galing. So, babalik yung ADP, phosphate, and NADP+ sa light-dependent. Then phase 3 is the regeneration. Babalik lang tayo sa ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate na molecule para mag-start ulit sa Calvin cycle. Okay? So that's all about the light-independent reaction. So ito yung parang product natin kanina, yung drawing natin kanina. So we have 3 molecules of RUBP plus 3 molecules of ADP plus phosphate. Yung dalawang phosphate na tinanggal natin. Yun. So that's the process. All right. So if you're going to ask how many ATP, NADPH, carbon dioxide were used in the process, i-times 2 lang natin yung sample natin kanina to have the total number of molecules used. But we have here a summary naman dun, yung input natin. Okay? So, ito yung summary of chemical reactions natin. So, ito yung summary sa light-dependent, itong nasa taas, which happens in the thylakoid. And the second one is the summary of our molecules used in the stroma. So, 6 carbon, 18 ATP, 6 carbon dioxide. Times 2 lang nato to ha. So, di ba sa example natin kay ano man yun? 3. So, times 2 lang. So, naging 6. Si ATP, ang nagamit natin is, so, sa ATP, ang nagamit natin is 9. So, 18 kay ATP. 9 times 2 lang siya. Then, bakit 9? Kasi 6 yung nagamit natin doon sa reduction plus 3 doon sa regeneration of ribulose bisphosphate. Kaya naging 18 siya. Then 12 NADPH. So times 2 lang natin. 6 lahat yung nagamit natin based doon sa example. So times 2, 12. Yan. So we have now this as our byproduct. Yan. ADP, phosphate, ions, NADP+. So those are our products sa stroma and the overall photosynthetic reaction. Ito na yung summary. Ato nang i-add lahat from the light-dependent and light-independent. So that's the summary of our reactions for the photosynthetic process. May question dito. Can the Calvin cycle alone create sugar from carbon dioxide during photosynthesis? Obviously, the answer is no, because Calvin cycle needs to have the product from the light-dependent reaction for them to be able to proceed. So without light-dependent, so di pa rin magkakaproduce ng sugar ang ating Calvin cycle. Right? So that's the answer to this question. So to summarize, for photosynthesis, particularly the light-independent reaction, it is also called as Calvin cycle or dark reaction or C3 cycle or carbon fixation. So it happens in the stroma of the chloroplast and they use carbon dioxide to produce ATP plus ATP and NADPH to produce glucose, ADP plus phosphate ions plus NADP plus. So glucose will be used as a food for the plant, while si ADP at saka si NADP plus will go back to the thylakoid membrane to participate dun sa light dependent reaction. So that's the process for the light independent.